From my story to your story, let's talk about grief. I will share my own grief journey, along with interviewing others about their path of sorrow and healing. I hope that you, the listener, will hear something that helps as you navigate your own grief, and that God will be glorified along the way. This content is meant as a discussion and not to give professional help. Let's get started.
So in this interview today, I have my middle son, Justin. And if you have watched any of the My Grief videos, you know that I have been sharing the story of my husband's passing when he was 55 years old. And at that time frame, Justin, you would have been how old? Do you remember?
28.
All right. So Justin lost his dad at 28 years old. One of the things I wanted to do was interview each one of my sons to show and talk about their perspective of grief, which is different than mine. But I want to start out and just say, Justin, how would you describe your dad?
That's a loaded question. I guess the first thing that comes to mind, is legendary. I viewed him as just like the best dad possible. Good at everything. Could fix anything. Could break anything. Had a few of those stories too. Yeah, I'll get into, I think, his character traits and other questions, but yeah, he was.
So it sounds like he was larger than life to you.
That's what I was about to say, yeah.
Your hero?
Yeah.
Okay.
In every way.
So what are some good characteristic traits that you remember about your dad?
I think the one that sticks out the most right off the bat is probably loyalty. Loyalty to his family, to his church, to its members. Just unwavering. Like he wasn't going to be steered one way or the other. He was compassionate. Like, he loved people deeply, and I get that from him as well.
Yes, you do.
Like if I was hurting, or if a church member was hurting, like he hurt with them, physically and like in a physical sick sort of way. Like when I deal with stress or grief, like it affects me mentally, but it also affects me physically, and we kind of process things in the same way. Bothered him the same way. He'd do anything for me, I guess. Yeah. When I think back through the years, I remember when I started my career working a variety of night shifts. Like, I would come home at either 3 a.m. or 6 a.m, and there would be a egg and cheese sandwich waiting on me. Like, he'd get up, or I'd text him, I'm on the way home. I'm good, I'm on the way home. He'd respond back, I got a sandwich waiting on you. He'd get up and just do things for people.
Yes.
And he did it for me, and those memories stick out. But then even in the days, leading up to his funeral, I found out so much more, like how much he had done that for other people too.
Any bad character traits that drove you nuts?
I don't know that I can't think of many. Like having been his son and having worked for him for a period of time, if he had an idea on how he wanted something done, like that was the right way. And the problem is, my way is the right way. Just ask anybody. Like, how I fix it is it being fixed correctly.
Yeah.
But that didn't fly with him. Like, he wanted it done that way. And I don't think that's a bad characteristic or a fault, but
he had a little stubbornness.
That is where we clashed. I can remember like projects. I'd tell him like, I'm going to do this, this, and this. And he'd say, well, here's why that won't work. I said, Dad, just let me show you why it will work.
I love it. What are some good memories you had, or a good memory that comes to mind? Maybe should we break that down into age categories? Like maybe something you remember from when you were little.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably the part where I'll start getting emotional, but
It's okay.
yeah. I just remember as a kid, like, I just wanted to be around him. He took me everywhere.
Yes, he did.
He just, like, you know, I wanted to do everything with him, and he made that happen. If he was going to the dump, I'd go with him because, like, I was with him, and so the dump was fun. If he was working on something, I'd be with him. So I have a lot of those memories. You know, riding a tractor with him while he's clearing snow or cutting grass. I can remember going on trips with him to when he would speak at other churches. Like those, some of those things stand out where he made a conscious effort to do something with each one of us. Like we each got a trip where it was just us and him, and we went somewhere. And like he worked during it. He was going there for a reason, but he would also make it fun as well.
And you do. I know that you do that with your boys now. You tend to just throw them in the car or the truck with you and take them to do whatever you're going to do.
Yeah, it's more difficult than I realized at the time because they both want that individual time. Mm-hmm. It's hard to tell either one no, especially on this end of things. So I've got a lot of good childhood memories. Growing up in the teenage years, he was invested in everything I was invested in. So if I was, you know, woodworking lessons, he'd get up at whatever awful time that was in the morning that we left, and he'd take me by the gas station to get me a sandwich on the way and drop me off and then pick me up a few hours later. If we were, you know, there was times where I was having to finish the, a project on my own, and he was making phone calls. If there was something he didn't know, he was calling somebody who did. Mm-hmm. And if it was something he did know, then he was doing it with me. It instantly comes to mind, I don't know if you remember this, when I was finishing the quilt rack for Grandma, and it was going to be in a competition a few weeks later, and I was short on time, and we needed to spray the finish, and the wood shop that I had was small and not ventilated, and I can remember we'd been spraying coat after coat all morning. So by the time you came to check on us, yes, we were both leaned over the table laughing about things that really weren't that funny, and laughing at everything.
I do remember that now.
And I remember that door popping open and you looking at us and seeing like the mist of lacquer in the air and telling us both to get out.
Get out.
Get some fresh air.
I forgot about that too. You brought that up. I love it.
Yeah, soccer, basketball. Like he was invested in everything that we did. And then like moving on into, I guess, my early 20s or just before 20s, like I can think of some terrible times, like the worst things at that time, the worst things I had ever faced. And I have good memories from those. One of them, like I wasn't old enough or mature enough to realize it wasn't going to be the worst day ever.
Right.
But at the time I thought it was. And I remember I called him and told him I was leaving. I told him what was going on. And I just told him I was on the way home. And So he kept me on the phone and just talked to me about other stuff. And like I was crushed. I was just absolutely crushed and distraught, and it was just a rough day. And I remember looking up in the mirror, and here came the front end of a car I knew really well down 295. I could see it just bobbing and weaving in between all the other cars. And I still had him on the phone. I was like, Dad, where are you at? And I want to quote it right. His response was, right where I'm supposed to be.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Sure enough, came in behind me.
Making sure you were not going to make a detour and you're going to get home. Okay. Precious. We're very fortunate to have someone in our lives that cared about us that deeply and showed us how to love other people.
Yeah. And then, I mean, he was an even better grandfather than he was a dad, which is hard to compare to or hard to believe. But I still go back and watch videos of just how he interacted with our kids. Like, it's not common. It was super special. Most people can't relate to a child in the way he did, or communicate with a child in the way he did. And just like us, like whatever we were into, that's what he was into. So Matchbox cars and Paw Patrol and whatever the newest, most annoying show or toy was that my kids were into, like that's what he was into.
Yeah.
He did it. He did Grandpa even better than he did Dad.
Well, hopefully we all do that as grandparents because we've had a little bit of time to learn some things. I don't know. So let's go to the serious topic of how did you feel, or describe for me what it was like for you when he passed away.
So I knew, unfortunately, I knew it was coming, and there was really no other sign that it was coming. For the most part, it was very much a shock, but I just had a bad feeling for whatever reason, and I was weird as a kid. Like, I dreaded that. I remember crying at night, and I remember like asking him, like, are you going to die? And he would tell me, like, yeah, but it's going to be a long time from now, and here's why it's going to be okay. So I remember as a kid, like, death bothered me. What comes after bothered me, and I had questions and didn't understand. I still have questions and don't understand, but I really struggled with it as a child. So I dreaded that day because he was everything, as close as you could be. So as the years went on, like it started to scare me more. As I got older, realizing like I've only got so much time left, not knowing it would be even shorter than what I thought.
Yeah.
But the days leading up, I could tell he wasn't doing well. At the time, I had a job that was fairly flexible, and I was able to move things around. I had been at the house repairing things. I had been at Nana Pop's house fixing a few things. I had some appointments in town. We had just finished building our house. So
yes.
I had some appointments in town, and that day before, I canceled everything. I called work and just told them I wasn't going to be in that day. And I got that worked out, and I guess I'll go back. The night before that, I was there too. I was over at the house too.
Yeah, I talk about that in the first video, how you would tell me later that after you left,
yeah,
you knew.
Yeah. so two nights before, really, I just had a feeling it wasn't going to be good. I didn't know when, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. So, but I forget what happened. I was busy getting the boys out of the house. I think one of them was upset, and I think the dog had done something. If we had the dog at that point,
You mean that morning?
No, that night.
Oh,
when I left, and that's when we left. And
Yes.
I texted you and I said, "Give Dad a hug for me."
Yes.
And it genuinely bothered me. Like, I went out of the house because even as a grown man, anytime I saw my dad, like if it was me leaving, I hugged him. I would still kiss him on the cheek. Like,
Yes.
25 years old, seen things and done things, and that still was important to me. But I didn't do it that night for whatever reason, and it bothered me. So I texted you and asked you to do it for me. And so the next day I came back over, and at that point I canceled what I had going on and stayed for the day from morning until about 10 o'clock that night. And I remember I made sure I hugged and kissed him that night.
I'm glad you got to do that. Yeah.
Sure. So then from there, I remember I hugged and kissed him that night, and I still felt like something was not right. So I called James and John, my two brothers, and just said, "Hey, Dad's not doing great. If you haven't made it by there in the last day or two, you need to get by." And at the time, I wasn't thinking he was going to die the next day. I just knew he wasn't doing good. It had worn on him. He was frustrated. I figured he could use seeing the other boys if they hadn't already been by. I hadn't talked to him, so I wasn't sure. I was just making sure.
I think I think the Lord allowed that. I didn't know till just this moment that you had called them the night before, but I know that when I messaged the next morning, they came straight there. And I don't know that they would have realized just to come, that, as soon as I mentioned I was going to take him to the hospital, if you hadn't done that.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure,
I mean, I'm saying, I think that it probably put in their mind,
that's
okay,
possible.
there's a more urgency than we realized.
And, so that night, after I talked to them, this part kind of sticks out because I kind of felt what was coming and I was terrified of it. Where we built our house, the stars are super bright, and it was a cold night. I can remember that. It's a chilly night. I got the boys inside. They had both fallen asleep on the ride home, and Lauren was inside. I remember standing outside and looking up at the stars, just begging God not to do it. Just asking him not to take him, just to give him a little longer. And later on, that would cause problems, because that was probably one of the most sincere prayers or things I'd ever asked for.
I just read an article written by a mother whose son was taken, and basically the article was saying that she felt like God had betrayed her because she prayed for the safety of and the watch care of her son, and yet she was still able to come back and say, I know from God's word that he's faithful, and this was his plan to take him. But those are the real things we grapple with, is things like, why did I really prayed that he wouldn't. You didn't answer my prayer that way.
Yeah. And looking back, like I don't even think I did it for selfish reasons. Like I knew what it would do, like the hurt it would cause and the voids that would have to be filled. Like I had thought about all of those things. Like, well, what happens next? So, yeah, I remember that specific prayer. And I didn't sleep a lot that night, so he and I texted into the night, and he was cracking jokes as always. Trying to make me feel better. Telling me to get some rest. And so the next day, I hadn't been up very long, and then I think you had sent a text just saying we're going to go ahead and get him to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So I got up and around and made arrangements again for work and was going to start that direction. And I think the first phone call was from James, and he said, "Get here quick." And I knew at that point, I knew what was going on. And this part's hard to talk about. I guess just because I had dreaded it since I was a kid, like I had thought about that moment over and over and over. And even as like going into police work, I would work these calls where people would lose a family member, and I would think like, that's going to be my dad one day. Like I specifically thought. So I would struggle with that at scenes without any inclination that was going to happen. And in those moments, that all came back, and I just froze. Like I knew what was coming, and I didn't want to be there for it. I didn't think I was strong enough to handle it. And I regret it. I struggle with it every time I think about it, but I don't know what that would have done, what place that would have put me in mentally to be there for. I don't know that that's something I could have carried. So I guess it works out for a reason.
Yes, exactly.
But I waited. I waited a few minutes, and I got dressed, and then at that point, began to panic. Like, okay, this is really happening. So I drove as fast as I could. From 30 miles away and got there, and he was already in the ambulance, and I don't remember what they said. I don't remember what Pop said. I don't remember what James said. I think it was something along the lines of they're working on him, they're trying, but I knew what was going on. I saw the police cars there, and that flipped another switch. Just like the realization that like that day had come, and it was my turn to be on that end of that type of call. So we began to work out the logistics of getting everybody to the hospital, and I remember I put you in the car with me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we drove there, and I remember you're telling me to drive safe. They told us just to get there, but I remember like they weren't driving lights and sirens, like they were just driving.
Yeah.
And I knew what that meant. So like in my head, I've already not processed, but it's already hit me like today's the day. So we got to the hospital. I remember going through the hospital doors, and the hospital clergy was standing there waiting.
Yeah. And
then, they escorted us back to a small room, and he did what, he's trying to do. He told us they were doing the best they could, and they would update us. And so after the clergy had left, we were briefly in the room together. Some of this is crystal clear and some of it is blurry. I don't know. I remember them coming out and getting us. And I remember them telling us how bad it was, that they were still trying, but it wasn't good. And I remember you wanting to go back there. Mm-hmm. And I knew, like, I'd seen it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, like what goes on when they're trying to save a person. And it's hard to watch when it's not your family member. So I remember trying to keep you from that and telling you it's not something you want to see.
Yeah.
And you wanted to see.
I felt like I had to know.
Yeah.
I had to know they tried, and then when they said he passed, I had to know.
So at that point, they hadn't told us that yet, and we ended up back. I remember going around the turn, and the curtain was open, and they were doing everything they could. But I'm not medically inclined or trained, but I knew how to read those machines enough to know that, like, it wasn't what I had feared had come. And the doctor, I don't fault him for it, but he was still saying, we've given a shot of this and we're doing that. And I remember just looking at him and uncertain terms saying,
like, we know.
No. I said,
okay.
Doc, he's gone, isn't he? He just looked at me and shook his head, yeah. And like one of the major memories that sticks with me from all of that was like Dad had strong arms. Like I remember him being strong, being able to lift things that as a kid just seemed like he was superhero level. But his arms and his hands, it was like a bear paw. And I remember as a kid, like watching him push him. He put me in the driver's seat of a bus and put it in neutral because it wouldn't start on the school buses at school. And so that they could work on it in the garage, he got behind it and pushed it, which may explain the back issues.
And what's sweet? What's sweet is when I interviewed Remy, he said, you told him pawpaw stories to keep his memory alive. Yeah. That's one of the stories he told.
But anyway, I distinctly remember his hand, just the way he was laid on the bed. Both arms were on the hospital bed, and it felt like it was all in the same moment. But I remember watching his hand go from, and I know he was already gone, but it was just like that final moment. I don't know how to explain it. Like I'd already realized it was happening, but like that was visual confirmation for me. Like I didn't want to see it, but I remember his hand was kind of folded in, or clenched, and I remember it dropping off the bed.
Yeah.
I just remember falling off the bed and that super strong arm just going limp. And knowing like that was it. So then from there, I remember going back out, and at that point I'm like, I'd take you back to the room, and I remember you how upset you were, and I think you've talked about that some already. There's things that I telling her that you don't remember.
No, there's things you told me I did and said.
That was one of the first things you said was, no, he can't be gone. I can't be a widow. And just like the screens, I remember, there was nothing I could do to fix it. Like there was nothing I could do to help, nothing I could do to fix it. And at that point, Nana Pop had arrived, and I caught Pop in the hallway, and it was about the same time as James was getting there. I just remember looking at James and shaking my head, and he knew what it meant. So he grabbed Pop, and we all ended up in the room. Pop immediately came to you to do what he could. And I think James and I went to turn back around to grab John as he was coming in. He didn't come in long after that. In my mind, it all happened about the same time. So, and that's where it starts to get blurry. I don't know why. Like, there's parts of it I can remember crystal clear, and then there's large amounts of time I don't remember. Like, I remember calling Lauren and telling her, get the kids and get to the hospital, that he was gone. And I called my sergeant, and who I was pretty close with as well, and told him, just kind of out of panic. And Lauren showed up with the boys. I remember telling them on the hospital porch what had happened, and I just remember being crushed. And Remy and his just, childlike faith. I told him, Papa's gone. Papa is not here anymore. He's gone to heaven. And that's hard to explain to a 4-year-old in that way. So as I'm just bawling my eyes out and crushed, he just looks up at me and says, but he's in heaven.
Yeah.
Like, it's that simple.
It's okay.
What's the problem? But for he and I both, as time would go on, it became far more complicated and far more painful than that. So, moving on from there, I don't remember much.
I think some of that is shock, because like you said, there were things you told me. I was afraid. I said, did I even look upset enough at the hospital? I know that's a silly way to look at it. And you were like, no, you were screaming. And I don't remember that. So I think some of the weaving in and out is your body's way of saying, I can only process so much of this kind of pain at one time.
Yeah. I remember in the days to follow, like, just not doing anything other than existing. People brought things. People started showing up. I didn't have anything to say. Didn't want to go anywhere. Didn't want to do anything. Didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be anywhere else. For some weeks after that, I don't remember much. Lauren just took care of everything.
Yeah, she did.
Like, I curled up in a ball and stopped doing everything, and she picked up.
Very thankful for my daughters in love. They were all, I'm going to talk to them individually about their pain and watching their husbands and what they went through individually. But they were unbelievable, that's for sure. What are some of the, still on the darker side, what are some things you deal with or have dealt with? What are the, like you mentioned earlier, it would cause you some problems that you had prayed so sincerely and your dad passed. So what are some of the hard things that have come out of this that you've had to process or deal with?
I mean,
did you question God?
Yeah, spiritually
what spiritually? Well,
faith-based or faith-related. It wasn't initial. I felt like God just carried us through all of it. In the immediate time to follow, as time would go on, as a kid, I already struggled with, my whole life struggled with, why do I believe what I believe? What if I'm wrong? The questions that go with that, the thought of eternity and how vast that is and incomprehensible that amount of time is, that's not even measurable. It just terrified me. It kept me awake at night. And so I struggled with that. I struggled with truly believing versus just wanting to. So that was already a recurring theme throughout childhood and early adulthood. And at that point, I knew what I believed and I went through the motions, but there was a large span of time where I questioned everything. I questioned, literally everything. Everything from what if I'm wrong? How terrible would that be if we are wrong? And this is it. Now he's just gone.
And you would never see him again.
Yeah. And there's nothing. So in that aspect, I didn't want to, I wanted to be right. I wanted to, be fully invested and believe, but still struggled to question, deep questions came up on everything from what does the Bible say about death? What does the Bible say about life after death? How the world came into its existence. Why would God create why would he create something knowing that it's going to fail and spiral out of control into what it is today? Why even put that into existence if he knew that's the way it was going to go? So I struggled with that. I struggled with, because of work, I deal with terrible people all the time. And a lot of those terrible people live to be 95 years old. They're alcoholics, crackheads, they wander the street, they live the wildest lifestyle possible and live to 95.
Yeah.
But here's my dad who had his faults, but did not live that way.
Right.
And he's gone at 50, and religion aside, faith aside, was a good person. Outside of what he was required to do for his job, just how he treated people was a good person. And he goes at 55, but this person who has given nothing to society and if they were gone in the next minute, no one would know and the world would be a better place for it.
Yeah.
So I struggled with that. Like, why him? And it took me, some of those things I still don't have answers for. And I've talked with different people. I've talked with our pastor / brother. I got a lot of answers from him. I've talked to other pastors. I've talked to friends in police work. Some of those things I still don't have an answer for, but I'm in a much better place than I was.
Good.
I know what I believe. I know why I believe it. But there are still some things I don't understand.
Yeah.
And I don't know that.
I don't know that we will.
I'll get answers for.
Right. There are some things I don't know that we'll understand this side of heaven. And scriptures say that God's ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are not our thoughts. And sometimes, like I've explained in some of the videos, sometimes that's the only conclusion I can come to at the end of the day. And I would like to take a video where there's, or, podcast where we take time and really open up about some answers to some of those. Time does help. And like you said, wise counsel helps. Well, I'm sure it has to bother you that your dad's not here to see things like, your kids growing up.
Yeah.
Or special occasions. You've gotten some awards that he would, I'm sure in heaven, is so proud of. And he would have made sure here on earth that you knew that. But what are some things that you think you have done or will do to keep his memory alive? For your kids, especially.
Yeah. I try to take the good out of the way he parented. Like the things that were most special to me and the memories that I have and why they are memories. I try to take those and do the same for my boys, whether that's just spending way too much on Christmas.
Yeah.
Just absolutely spoiling. Or trips, or, it's all those things that I treasure. I try to give them that same, because I know how much it means to me. The boys were young. Barrett was very young. Remy
Yes.
was pretty young, but Remy was very close to Dad.
Yes.
And he's wired like I am wired. Loyal to the core and loves just very deeply.
Yes.
Like an uncommon
Yes.
love. So, and I myself struggled to remember, like, here I am, like, I know I've had this awesome life of how I was raised and things I got to do and things I've had or owned. And I also tried to help myself with remembering things by telling them stories. So I just called them Paw stories.
Stories.
Several times a week. And really it got to be where it was every night because they would demand them in order to go to sleep. So that was their I don't know, what's the word for that? They held it over my head until I paid the debt, a ransom, with a story. And I would tell them stories of everything from things that interest them, like equipment, types of stuff I had seen him drive, or, knocking trees down, or towing a UPS truck that got stuck on Christmas Eve. Just different things like that. And they wanted to hear as many as they could. And it got to where I told everything I could remember, and that bothered me. But I've tried to make it to where I share those stories.
We probably need to take a photo album out, or some of the old videos, and they'll spur on more memories.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get that from your mother, the whole, I can't remember but a few oddball things. I remember the strangest things and not all of the important things sometimes. And this is a hard one, but if you could say something to your dad right now, what would you say?
Oh, it's all this on the cheat sheet. And I cried just thinking about it.
Like Remy said to me, sometimes when I pray, I tell God something I would love for him to tell Papa for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, what would you want God to tell you?
The first person I had ever heard do that was James, actually.
Yeah.
I just remember him genuinely saying, like, I don't know if it works this way.
Yeah.
But if it does. I thank him because of what he did and what he invested in me. I get compliments or friends and family. I'll fix something for them or do something for someone just without thinking about it, because that's what he did, and they'll thank me for it. But I don't really. I just do it because that's what should be done, and I think he instilled a lot of that in me. Mm-hmm. How, if I turn out to be a good parent, I try to incorporate a lot of his qualities and a lot of his parenting styles or parenting style things he did. Like, I put those in. So I'd thank him because of what he did for me. Like, my boys are going to grow up and be
very invested dad.
Yeah. Like, they're going to be good people. And yeah, I tell him I miss him for sure. Whoever said, and people say it just to try to help. But they say it'll get easier with time. Mm. Yeah.
And just learn to carry the grief. It doesn't go away.
It hurts the same today as it did that day. Mm. The only difference is I find myself able to distract myself better.
Mm. Well said.
I'm only able to distract myself better now than I could then. Like, it hurts the same. And for anybody that is going through that, like, there's no good way to say that. There's no sugarcoating it. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. Like, it's gonna hurt forever. But you cope with it better.
Yes.
You distract yourself better. And you get through. So, and there's just so much I wish he could have seen. I feel like he's just in 5 years missed out on so much. So, like, knowing all the big milestones that will come that he won't be a part of, like that probably hurts the worst.
Yeah, and I hate that he's not a part of it, although, I let myself dream about it, and I guess once we go to heaven, it really probably won't matter or be that important, but I let myself dream about that on earth in the sense that maybe they can see some, excuse me.
Yeah,
maybe they can see some of what's going on, or maybe some of the milestones they get a glimpse of them, and that's probably just more for my finite mind on earth, but you don't know. I know that there are some scripture verses that talk about what's happening on earth being seen from heaven. So it's possible. It's possible. But yes, there's still that hole because he's not physically here for us to see his reaction or view him seeing any of those things. So back to what you would say to him, basically. Thank him for investing in you. And
until I had kids, like, I knew how good of a parent he was, and I thought I knew how good of a person he was, but I until I start raising my own and get to the age I'm at, then I realize like what it took, the level of effort that goes into to what he did for us.
To being a good parent.
Yeah.
And so one thing people could be encouraged with is if you're making the effort and you're trying, that here's living proof that it makes a difference and that it matters, and that children do grow up and become who they are because of what you put into them. And that's what I guess I would say. And that I've done pretty well not crying too much, but I'll probably cry saying this. Of course, my 3 sons are one of the most precious things that came out of our relationship, other than the relationship itself. And so that is what's special about having my children still with me, is that I feel like I do get to see your dad still on this earth. So thanks for
sharing my grief.
Speaking your grief, that's what it's called. For sharing your heart. I know this was not easy, but I think there are people out there, sons and others who, daughters, whatever, will listen and hopefully just feel like, okay, yeah, I'm not crazy. This is what it's really like, and just be encouraged by what you said. I love you.
Love you too.
We appreciate you joining us today at Speak Your Grief with Sonia. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube as new episodes are added weekly. Thank you again for joining us as we unpack our grief. We hope you have been reminded that you are not alone in this journey.